Coming up on Network Africa, Togo's opposition denounces proposed new constitution as a power grab to aid tenure elongation. 1 year into the civil war in Sudan, concerned parties call for international action. Plus, a United Nations-backed gathering raises pledges of almost $630 million to ease Ethiopia's humanitarian crisis. Hello and welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Layo Olarinde here in Lagos. We'll begin in Togo, where the opposition has denounced the proposed new constitution as a power grab intended to extend the reign of President Faure Gnassingbe. The reforms would see the West African country move from a presidential to a parliamentary system of government. But the opposition say this is a ruse to keep Mr. Gnassingbe, who's already in his fourth term, in power. They add that the reforms would allow him to remain president until 2031 and then be appointed to the new position of President of the Council of Ministers, in effect the Prime Minister, continuing his family's 57-year rule. The constitutional changes were approved by lawmakers last month, but in the face of mounting public anger, Mr. Gnassingbe paused the reforms and said they would be subject to further consultations. President Gnassingbe came into power in 2005 after the death of his father, who had been president since 1967. As the conflict in Sudan enters its second year, demonstrators have gathered in Washington, D.C. to call on the U.S. government and the international community to intervene. On Monday, the North African country marks the first anniversary of its ongoing civil conflict. Protesters, including Sudanese experts, held Sudanese flags and placards and banners chanting "All eyes on Sudan," "Peace and justice for Sudan," and "Stop the war now." Or after 1 year of war, over 8.4 million people have been forced to leave their homes both inside and outside the country, making Sudan to have the highest rate for international displacement in the world.
We hope that the U.S. and other countries can persuade these countries to stop funding this genocide. In fact, I believe both of the generals who are leading it should be put under arrest and tried by the International Criminal Court.
I am here today just to basically, highlight what's going on specifically in Sudan when it comes to all that is going on in human rights right now. The RSF has killed my cousin, of course, right here, Gathag, and then also my family, my aunt right here, her children right here. They fled. They are displaced. They're now living in Egypt because of all that has happened in Sudan. We're still supporting them. So we're asking for the U.S. to act to basically give them basic human necessities such as food, such as housing, such as school, and just to do what is right and stop these guys are bad guys.
Well, just a recap on how Sudan got to where it is now in this conflict. In 2019, longtime leader Omar al-Bashir was ousted by the military. In the same year, Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok was appointed and served till January 2022 when he resigned. He had been ousted in a coup in 2021, but then reinstated. A military council was in charge of the country since the coup in 2021, although tensions emerged between both heads of the warring factions, that's General Al-Burhan and Dagalo Hemedeti, over the country's direction, the integration of the RSF into the army, and the planned transition to civilian rule. Well, let's discuss this further. Joining us now is Professor Brooke Hailu, an Ethiopian African Affairs analyst. Thank you so much, Professor, for your time.
Thank you for having me, Ms. Layo. Thank you so much.
Well, it has been one crisis after another in Sudan from 2019 when Omar al-Bashir was ousted, the military coups, and then to this current conflict. Now, looking at the personalities of these men heading the warring factions and the disagreements that's been between them, the army and the paramilitary group RSF, can this conflict end?
That's a great question. And as one says, in America, it's $1 million question, Ms. Layo. And this is a rivalry of two generals. It is really sad. The two generals have their own ego, I would say, and their own power objectives. And both of them, they want to be on top. And in the middle are the people who are caught. And Sudan, hence, is plunged into its a civil war, which is now exactly a year ago. So there is a disaster that has unfolded in Sudan. This disaster is of paramount catastrophic proportions for Sudan itself, for the region, the Horn of Africa, for Africa, and also it will have implications for regional as well as international peace and security. So how would it end? It would end, we do hope, against all hopes, that the two sides should come together and negotiate a settlement. And here, a big role can be played by the African Union, the European Union, the United Nations, and other regional powers in Africa, putting the two sides together so that they will hand back power to the rightful owners, and that is the people, as it was supposed to be in April 2019. It was the people, a coalition of professional organizations, teachers, lawyers, doctors' associations, women associations. They were the ones who really felt the blow of and the rout and the anger of Omar al-Bashir's 30-year rule to topple this regime. And then in April 2019 up to August 2019, a 3-year transitional government was put in place. And it is in October 2021 that the people of Sudan, they were robbed of their sovereign rights when the formal military coup was staged, ousting the civilian government in October 2021. And that's where we are now. And government of civilian rule should be put in place. There should be a strict cessation of hostilities and ceasefire should be put in place and monitored strictly by AU and the United Nations. And thirdly, the silencing of the guns and the stoppage of the supply of weapons to the different warring parties should be cut off, and as well as their funding. I think if this is done, I know it's an arduous task, then Sudan will have its peace. Otherwise, Sudan is sliding towards anarchy and towards being a failed state.
Well, Professor, why do you think these men, have not been able to come to the dialogue table despite all mediating efforts we've seen from the US, from Saudi Arabia, which, have not succeeded in bringing them face to face?
Yes, good question. One is, as you know, there are a number of crises in Africa, newer ones, as well as in other parts of the world. And Sudan is like has been pushed below. Newer cases has come. And secondly, as to why the two gentlemen, there are also, economic interests. Economic interests coupled with political interests. Each have their own domain. Each tell us and tell the world and the Sudanese people that they are the custodians of the Sudanese people, which it seems is not the case. Both should have been dedicated and committed to put Sudan above their heads. But instead, it is vice versa. They have put their own personal ego, their economic and political interests, they have put it above the Sudanese people. So I think unless these two groups, generals and their supporters, are put aside, I don't think Sudan will have peace. I don't think that the Sudanese people will enter a new chapter of reestablishing peace and order and peaceful conditions. And that's how I see it.
Oh, well, you mentioned earlier that, Sudan seems the crisis has been pushed to the side. Does this mean the world doesn't care about Sudan? And this is despite calls from UN and other humanitarian agencies saying that, Sudan now has the highest international displacement in the world.
Very true. Very true. You have put it in the right perspective. Look, if I start with how many people died, Ms. Layo, already 14,000, more than 14,000 Sudanese have died. And how many IDPs, internally displaced people, were forced from their home? It has approached the 10 million mark, 10 million people, counting those who were pushed outside the country, and those who are inside the country are about 7 million. And then, mind you, life has stopped. Farmers don't till the land. Students don't go to school. Hospitals have stopped working. Normal life has been put on hold. So that means that there is a need for humanitarian assistance. People don't even have basic food to survive on. So what we have is 24.8 million Sudanese are in need of humanitarian assistance. Can you imagine? That's about 50% of the total population of the Sudan. And then we have 1.76 million Sudanese, according to UNHCR, who have crossed the border to Ethiopia, to South Sudan, and to Egypt. And on top of that, what we find now is, believe it or not, there is the famine early warning signs. And Sudan is on top of that in the world, an impending famine. And that threatens Khartoum, West Darfur, the greater Darfur region, and other provinces and regions of the Sudan. And affected are 5 million people who are on the brink of experiencing famine. So Sudan, I would say, is about to enter a collapse. That's a very, very, very sad thing, meaning that Sudan is no longer, cannot sustain itself, and the war is pushing the Sudan to complete collapse. And mind you, not only Sudan, but the neighboring countries are going to be affected. Why? Because Sudan is in a very geostrategical position. Sudan is a crossroad between SSA, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the northern part of the Maghreb Africa. And then also Sudan has 3 feet, so to speak, 3 feet. One is on the Red Sea side, the Horn of Africa. The other is in the Central African side, and the other is in the North African side. What's happening in the Sudan, let's say in the northern side of Sudan in North Africa, would affect Libya and Egypt. And in East Africa and the Horn, what's going on in the Sudan would affect Ethiopia and Eritrea, and South Sudan as well. What goes on in Central Africa is going to affect very weak countries like Central African Republic and Chad.
Indeed.
And by the way, Chad is across the Nigerian border, as you know, my sister. So on top of that, then terrorism is expanding.
It's all intertwined, and a sad situation, Professor. We do hope for a quick respite to the crisis. But we thank you so much, Professor Brooke Hailu. Thank you always for your insights.
Thank you, Ms. Layo, and greetings to all Nigerians wherever they might be. To my brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back to the program. A United Nations-backed gathering has raised pledges of almost $630 million for Ethiopia's humanitarian crisis, falling short of the $1 billion sought to help feed and support millions of people facing conflict and climate change in Africa's second most populous country. The US and the UK are among donors who are calling on the Ethiopian government to ensure aid is delivered without interference and also reaching those in need. Ethiopia faces a number of conflicts. The 2-year conflicts in the northern Tigray region, which ended with a peace deal in November 2022, left most of the region's population of 6 million relying on humanitarian aid. According to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the emergency in Ethiopia has been building through cycles of droughts and floods and conflict. Food insecurity and malnutrition in children is expected to peak at 10.8 million people during the July-September lean season. Some 4.5 million people have fled their homes, and there is rising concern for the provision of public health and protection. Well, South Africa is hosting the 2024 South Africa-China Jobs Fair underway at the Gallagher Convention Center in Midrand, Pretoria. More than 70 Chinese-invested companies operating in South Africa are participating in the job fair. Those behind the event say it's positioned to address the challenges of unemployment and also address the country's economic recovery, growth and development. Our South Africa correspondent Innocent Samosa reports.
In a bid to address the pressing challenge of unemployment in South Africa, some 77+ Chinese businesses based in South Africa are offering locals about 6,000 jobs in the next 3 years.
I thank Chinese investing enterprises and strengths from both South Africa and China for their active participation and strong support. The warm-up recorded important scenes from President Xi Jinping's visit to South Africa last August.
So this relationship is a very strong relationship. There are lessons that must be learned. China itself, you know, in its history, comes from a history of what used to be called backwaters at the time. But look at how far it has gone in growing its own economy, in building infrastructure, in having new industries. Those are the lessons that we have to learn, but learning is a two-way process.
I asked the minister in the presidency, Maropeni Ramakgopa, to find out whether or not these Chinese businesses comply with South Africa's labor laws. And this is what she had to say.
There have been, of course, and I know while you are asking that, there have been instances where there were not necessarily adherence to all the labor laws of South Africa, because if you know, companies that come here would come with their own cultures and their own understanding, and when they come here, then they don't do exactly what is it that we need. But what we have been able to do is that we are continuously engaging with the embassy, we are continuously engaging with the formation that deals with or that is housing all these companies.
We have the company values, and people is a very important asset, and it's one of our company value. So we're always caring for people, also including the environment. So that's why we always thinking people is more important for the company, and we're always looking, the talent, especially support the local education, also the local employment.
Some unemployed young people say this is a step in the right direction.
There's nothing as painful as studying and then you don't get a job. So this initiative at least brings hope. There's hope for the future, especially for upcoming graduates, because at least there's something they will get.
It is a good initiative because for some youth, others I think they didn't come here for nothing. Others are going to be employed. I'm really sure, because I did civil engineering. I only saw 3 companies that are dealing with civil engineering.
Let's hope that this event won't just be a talk shop with empty timelines and no clear direction. From Pretoria, South Africa, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
The United Nations Special Representative for Libya and the head of the UN support mission in the country, Abdoulaye Bathily, has tendered his resignation to Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Mr. Bathily expressed his decision, citing significant challenges in his mediation efforts. He laments that his attempts to foster dialogue and address concerns were met with stubborn resistance, unreasonable expectations, and indifference to the interests of the Libyan people. The resignation of Bathily now raises concerns about the trajectory of UN mediation efforts in Libya and the ongoing quest for political stability in the nation.
Since the end of 2022, the United Nations led efforts to help resolve Libya's political crisis through elections, faced national as well as regional pushbacks, revealing an intentional defiance to engage in earnest and a tenacity to perpetually delay elections. Preconditions put forward by Libyan leaders contradict their proclaimed intention to find a Libyan-led and Libyan-owned solution to the conflict. So far, they have not demonstrated their goodwill. Concerns regarding the weakening of the international consensus on Libya are growing within the general population, as their country has become the playground for fierce rivalry among regional and international actors motivated by geopolitical, political, and economic interests, as well as competition extending beyond Libya and related to its neighborhood. Libyan leaders must reach a political settlement based on negotiations and compromise. We cannot allow the aspirations of 2.8 million of registered Libyan voters to be overshadowed by the narrow interests of a few. I call on the Council to heed their legitimate dream.
The sooner African countries start building the capacity for their youth population, the better for development in the region. This is the assertion of the Malawian Minister of Finance, who was speaking on the sidelines of the annual meeting of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank Group. The spring meetings bring together a financial executives to discuss issues of global concern, including the world economic outlook, poverty eradication, economic development, and aid effectiveness.
If we want a completely changed economic dimension, we need to build the capacity of the African youths in areas of innovation, technology, science, and research, so that we can be able to attract more resources into Africa. Because if we are not developed technologically, it will be very difficult for African youths to actually develop and attract resources. So time to capacitate ourselves is now. Time to not necessarily focusing on technology that doesn't help is now. For example, we eat what we grow in Africa. So you cannot download food from WhatsApp and your iPhone. You simply need to go to farms and farm. How many African youths are interested in farming? So once they get knowledge and technology, then we can add value to agricultural productivity in Africa. We can add value to mining in Africa. We can add value even to labor export in Africa. So these are some of the issues and appeals that we are appealing to African youths to make sure that the next generation, African countries, should reach the middle income advanced economies where aid will not be an option.
And that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.